We've so far been talking about things that are fairly simplistic in terms of the way that humans take in and process and store different information. And a lot of that information has dealt with things that we're comfortable with. Things that you might even have heard when we were talking about Piaget, or when we were talking about Vygotsky, and to some degree maybe even some of the Ericksonian stuff that we discussed. But let's just take a pulse here. We're just going to kind of step back, take a breath, look at where we've been, and then we'll move from here into the much more complex way of thinking. And what I'm saying here is we have taken time now to pretty deeply understand the functioning, the processes that go on as we're learning, as we were talking about the human memory. And now what we're going to do is, instead of talking about how that exists, how it basically happens, sort of really on that basic level, we're going to look at a more complex way of supporting the way that students think, process, learn information. So let's go back just real quick and look at where we've been. In the model of human memory, we have discussed the major parts. We talked about the stimuli coming in from the environment, and they came into and through the sensory registers, and then they came through attention and perception. Then they went into working memory, and then they went from working memory, we went into long-term memory, which is a storage process. And then there is this overarching awareness of what we're doing, the metacognitive piece. So we talked about all the pieces and parts of those. We talked about them in terms of stimuli, memory stores, and cognitive processes. And the other thing that we talked about a little bit in terms of implications was, and this happened sort of along and along as we were going through the topic. We talked about meaningful encoding, ways that we can support that meaningful encoding. And I just want us to kind of refresh on that, and then we'll wipe the board clean and we'll move on to this concept of cognitive processes, the complex cognitive processes, not just the ones that are the cognitive processes that we have within that memory, that human memory model, but the ones that we take from there and things that we will then do with our students to support their learning, building upon this foundation. We want students to retrieve the schema that they have, and that means they take them from long-term memory, where they have all of their extant schema. Remember, we talked about that hole that you can reach into and grab the schema and pull it back into working memory from where you are? That's what we're saying. We know that when students understand something, or when they have had experience with something, they have an understanding, which we're calling a schema, and that schema may be right, may be wrong, may be complete, may be incomplete, but we want them to pull that back into consideration in their working memory. So while they're in working memory, they're dealing with that extant schema, and they're building it to some degree. Now, how do we get that to happen? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to be sure that we're organizing the content in ways that students are going to be able to resonate with. We need to put it in ways that they have heard it before. And this is one of the beauties of us having a sort of a spiral curriculum. Then we have this organizational process whereby we can reach back in and grab stuff and bring it back, and then we add new things, and then we reach down and grab all of that stuff and add new to that. And that's the nature of the spirality aspect of the curriculum. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to build upon already known schema, or already known things. What we're trying to do is we're trying to build on extant schema. So, extant just means it exists. It's what's already up there. So, we organize that. Then we try to get the students to elaborate, not just elaborate the content, but to elaborate the implications of the content, to understand what it is that, not just, what are the facts, but what do those facts mean? What does this do to you as you're thinking about this as a learner? Or how does this help you? How does it affect you? And then the notion of imagery is just the idea that we're trying to get our students to picture, to think about in complete ways this content that we're trying to build. So when we're working on schema, we're working on putting together this whole package in their minds. Long-term memory holds the schema, and the process that we go through of schema building is that process of retrieval from long-term memory, and then rehearsal within working memory, and the addition of new content, and then the encoding, which is this arrow, the encoding of this information into long-term memory. Now let's take all of this and we'll use that as a starting place, and we'll go from here to build this notion of complex cognitive processes.